obeisances on behalf of everybody who have joined the group and are about to join. Prabhuji, we are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam and we are on Canto 1, Chapter 16. Chapter 16 is how Parikshit received the age of Kali, and today we are on text 9. So, Prabhuji, I hand over to you. Would you like us to do the Manglacharan?
Please, thank you.
Do we have any volunteers for the Manglacharan, or should I carry on? Any volunteers? Prashanant Madas, would you like to do the Manglacharan? Okay. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Your Manglacharan is very sweet when you recited it last time. Is your internet allowing you to do it?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, you are very much audible. Kindly continue.
Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnana Salakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Mano Abhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Sayam Rupa Kadamayam Yadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Vrishabhantu Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Titanam Pavani Vyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Krishnatma, for the wonderful Manglacharan recital. So, Prabhuji, we've just done the Manglacharan. We are on text 9 of chapter 16. Shall we hand over to you, or would you like us to read the text as well?
I can read. Thank you very much. A reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 16, Text 9. How Parikshit received the age of Kali. Mandasya manda pradakshna vayo manda yusas chavai nijaya hriyati naktam divacha vyartakaramimi. Translation. Lazy human beings with paltry intelligence and a short duration of life pass the night sleeping and the day performing activities that are for naught. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The less intelligent do not know the real value of the human form of life. The human form is a special gift of material nature. In the course of her enforcing stringent laws of miseries upon the living being. Is it a chance to achieve the highest boon of life, namely to get out of the entanglement of repeated birth and death? The intelligent take care of this important gift by strenuously endeavoring to get out of the entanglement. But the less intelligent are lazy and unable to evaluate the gift of the human body to achieve liberation from the material bondage. They become more interested in so-called economic development and work very hard throughout life simply for the sense enjoyment of the temporary body. Sense enjoyment is also allowed to the lower animals by the law of nature, and thus a human being is also destined to a certain amount of sense enjoyment according to his past or present life. But one should definitely try to understand that sense enjoyment is not the ultimate goal of life. Herein it is said that during the daytime one works for nothing, because the aim is nothing but sense enjoyment. We can particularly observe how the human being is engaged for nothing in the great cities and industrial towns. There are so many things manufactured by human energy, but they are all meant for sense enjoyment and not for getting out of material bondage. And after working hard during the daytime, a tired man either sleeps or engages in sex habits at night. That is the program of materialistic civilized life for the less intelligent. Therefore, they are designated herein as lazy, unfortunate, and short-lived. Oh. Om Gyanatimirandasya Ganangadashalakaya Chakra Unmilitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. It's really, whenever we read purports like this and we see verses like this, it's kind of it's very difficult to grasp. It's very difficult to take it in. The extent to which the material energy has taken over our life and absorbed us in engaging in so many abominable activities that are not meant for our own ultimate well-being. And of course, I'm speaking for myself. Every time I talk, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not lecturing to other people that this is the way they think, but we kind of recoil from purports like this because the stark reality is so harsh. Wow, this is like it's like shining a microscope. Hello, and it's difficult to accept in many ways, but it is, unfortunately, it's like a wake-up call when we hear purports like this. Prabhupada says on many occasions, if a man is pretending to be sleeping, it's very difficult to wake him up because he's pretending. But if somebody is really asleep, you can wake him up in a second. Just, hey, wake up. So these kinds of purports are, they're designed to keep us awake and make sure that we stay awake. In the previous verse you were speaking yesterday about Lord Yamaraj, he was attending the conference with the sages at Namasharanya, and Sutta Goswami, he said, as long as we have somebody like Yamaraj here, who is the personification of death, then we've all risen automatically above the inevitable passage of time and death, because we're engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord simply by hearing. Everybody at the sages, they were all hearing the Bhagavatam, and because of Yamaraj, he was also present. He also wanted to hear what is happening here, and he was absorbed in the ecstasy. So as long as he was present, so the whole idea is that we should be constantly absorbed in thinking and hearing about the pastimes of the Lord and the whole recitation of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But Prabhupada says here, stringent laws of miseries upon the living being, this human form of life, is to help us to rise above the stringent laws. And he goes on to say that It is a chance to achieve the highest boon of life, namely to get out of the entanglement of repeated birth and death. And of course, as Prabhupada points out, on so many occasions, the intelligent take care of this important gift by strenuously. Prabhupada loves these. He uses these words so like an arrow. It just penetrates strenuously. I mean, you make a huge endeavor, and you endeavor with determination, like it says in that 9:14 verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Satatam kirtayantamam yatantascha dridha vrata. So we make this vow, dridha, with determination. And we make this vow to do what with determination? Satatam kirtayantomam. Constantly chanting the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I was reading Krishna book a few days ago. I remember it was when all the residents of Vrindavan, they went to Kurukshetra to meet the Yadu members, who were also their relatives and friends. And of course, when they met, Ugrasena was on the throne. He was the Aishvarya king. Nanda Maharaj was a king in his region, in his own right. And as soon as they met the residents of Vrindavan, they just immediately embraced. Everybody was in floods of tears. They hadn't seen each other for such a long time. Rohini and Devaki and Yashoda, they were meeting, and they were like embracing each other. And the whole scene was one of love and affiliation and affection for every member of the family. Was like greeted and treated like royalty. They were royalty. And it was a huge meeting that all of them came together because of the result of the solar eclipse. And whilst Mother Yashoda and Mother Rohini and Mother Devaki, whilst they were engaged in conversation, of course, they all embraced Krishna, and Nanda Maharaj and Mother Yashoda, they took Krishna and Balaram, who were adults. I mean, they were kings living in Dwarka at this stage, but they had all met at Kurukshetra. And of course, they were adults. So Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj, they took Balaram and Krishna on their lap, and they're just embracing them like their children. And Krishna and Balaram, they were reciprocating with this because it had been such a long time. They had this loving affiliation and affection for their parents, and everybody was just absorbed in the whole mood of ecstasy. But when Mother Yashoda, Mother Rohini, and Mother Devaki, when they were engaged in all the gossip since they had last met, and so Krishna saw, they're happy now. They're absorbed in each other's company. So he snuck off to meet the gopis, who had also come to meet all the Yadu dynasty and everybody. So they had all come from Vrindavan, and then they were just, when Krishna met the gopis, then there was just everybody just collapsed, and the whole thing was like. And Krishna was making all kinds of apologies and so on and so forth. I'm really sorry I left you. And they were saying, but you just dumped us like that and you just went away, and now you're a big king and we never see you anymore. But then it's described in the Krishna book how Krishna says, well, you're always remembering me, even in separation, vipralamba, and I am always remembering you, also in separation, and also as you are turning your thoughts, even in separation, to me constantly, I'm also turning my thoughts to you constantly. And as I'm sitting in your heart and you are in me, then we're not really separate. We're just separate in the mind. And this mood of separation, it increases the love, it increases the devotion. When the beloved is separated from the lover, then of course this increases the mood and there's constant thoughts of this. So Krishna is giving a long talk in Krishna book about why they're not really separate and how they're absorbed in thoughts of each other. And it's such a loving reciprocation. But we're in the same situation. We're in exactly the same situation as Krishna and the gopis, because we are separate from the Supreme Lord, but the Supreme Lord is not separate from us. So the more we turn our thoughts in the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam, and the more we absorb our thoughts in Him with determination, then of course we can overcome this material energy, which is all enveloping, all powerful, absorbed. And Prabhupada goes on to say, but the less intelligent are lazy and unable to evaluate the gift of the human body to achieve liberation from the material bondage. They become more interested in so-called economic development and work very hard throughout life simply for the sense enjoyment of the temporary body. Now, people think, because of statements like this, they think, well, you know, we should, is it advocating that we all go off and live in the forest? No, of course not. There was one time Srila Prabhupada, he went to Hong Kong. It was the first time he went to Hong Kong, actually. Burijan was started a fledgling temple in Hong Kong, and Srila Prabhupada went to encourage his disciple. He was struggling a bit. China is a little bit difficult. It was part of Britain at the time, of course, but they were using it as a stepping stone to engage in the mainland China. And it was a struggle. The Chinese, it was a little difficult to engage the Chinese people in the service of the Lord. But he was making some inroads, so Prabhupada went. And Burijan, he was staying in a simple kind of rundown part of town, and he didn't want to have Srila Prabhupada stay with him and his wife in that kind of an atmosphere. So he rented an apartment. He rented the whole floor, actually, in this very expensive hotel in the middle of Hong Kong. And he invited all the press to come and see Srila Prabhupada. And of course, the press came, and by this time, Prabhupada was quite famous in the West. So the press came, and they're all there. And like I said, it was a part of Britain. It was still a colony at that time. So all the British press came, the Chinese press came, and so on and so forth. They're asking all kinds of, you know, the usual ridiculous questions. What are those marks on your forehead? And all this kind of mundane sort of things. Nothing very interesting. But of course, they wanted to get a headline. And that's all the press are interested in, this dynamic headline where they can voice some controversy. So they said, one of the reporters said to Prabhupada, but you know, people have this idea, you know, you're a monk, you live in the forest, you're a renunciant, and so on and so forth. So why are you living in these opulent surroundings? And they saw Prabhupada arriving. Burijan had rented a Rolls Royce, and Prabhupada arrived in a Rolls Royce. It was garlanded everywhere. There were probably dozens of garlands around his neck. He was escorted to his hotel with a big kirtan. Devotees had flown in from so many places to help Burijan to receive Prabhupada. And so there was a big hullabaloo, and all the reports are there, you know, with their notes and scribbling. Here you are, you're supposed to be a renunciant and live a simple life. And, you know, what's all this riches and wealth in this opulent surroundings? So Prabhupada said, yes, that's true. It would have been better to have a simple opulent surroundings. I could have, you know, come here straight from the plane and gone straight and sat under a tree in the forest somewhere. How many of you would have come to see me? So it's like, that's a fact, because people are attracted to this kind of mundane conception of what a devotee is, a mundane conception of how does one engage in devotion? So people have this crazy notion that devotees just live in this pie in the sky idea with no concept of what's going on in the world. Devotees are the most ones who are clued in the most into what's going on in the world, and it's the non-devotees, or the karmis as we call them, who don't have a clue, because they completely identify with all this material nonsense that the whole world's engaged in. So Prabhupada is saying here, sense enjoyment is also allowed, and this is a point that Prabhupada emphasizes over and over again, constantly. And we think to the point of, well, I understand this, Prabhupada. Why you keep repeating it? Because we're dense, we're just dull. We don't have anything in our brain. So he has to keep repeating it because we're going through millions and millions of lifetimes of identifying with this matter, and now we've reached the human form of life. We have to make the most of it. We need to be reminded constantly, this is the goal of life. Prabhupada goes on to say, sense enjoyment is also allowed to the lower animals by the laws of nature. So the lower animals, they're also entitled to the same sense gratification that we as human beings are entitled to. And thus a human being is also destined to a certain amount of sense enjoyment according to his past or present life. So this is destined. But then when we reach the stage, but one should definitely try to understand that sense enjoyment is not the ultimate goal of life. That doesn't mean that sense enjoyment doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that we negate it. It doesn't mean that we deny it. We're not Buddhists. We're not Jains. We just go into some kind of subsonic meditation and that's it. No, we're not renouncing anything. What do we have to renounce? What is ours to renounce? What belongs to us? No, we engage everything in the service of the Supreme Lord. That is real renunciation, to understand where all this opulence, all this wealth, all this accumulation of all these cities and everything, where have they all come from? They've all come from Krishna. So we don't renounce anything. We simply engage it in the service. Prabhupada said, and Krishna says, what can suppression accomplish? Krishna says directly in Bhagavad Gita, what can suppression accomplish? It can accomplish nothing. But we have to develop this recipe book we've sold in the millions all over the world, higher taste. We have to get this higher taste. When we get the higher taste, when we get this understanding of what is this alternative to this mundane life, as soon as we get even the smallest inclination of this higher taste, everything else is mundane. Everything else is insignificant. It's already mundane, but then it becomes insignificant also in our understanding. And then gradually we build on that taste, that ruchi. We just build on it and build on it and build on it, just like when you're building the foundation of a house. You start at the bottom and then you work your way up, and gradually the house manifests. So we're doing that. We're building this Vaikuntha Loka house in which the whole world can live. The Prabhupada is given to us literally on a plate. Here it is said that during the daytime, one works for nothing. Prabhupada put this "for nothing" in inverted commas. But how can this be a legitimate claim? One works for nothing in what sense? If you go out in the morning, you're a businessman, and you make $1 million in your business for that day, how can that be claimed that you've worked for nothing? Or you've opened a new factory, you've opened a new office, you've opened a new institution, or whatever the case may be. You've something to show for your work. You're a car manufacturer. You can show, I made so many cars today. I made so many trucks. I built so many airplanes, whatever the case may be. Whatever it is, there's something to show at the end of a day's work. So how can this claim be for nothing? For nothing in the sense that if we haven't understood the goal of the human form of life, everything we do is for nothing. Everything. Because at the end, it's all gone. And then at night, then engaged in ignorance, in the daytime working for nothing, and then before long, it's over. And then your life is over. I was just reminded a few minutes ago that I'm an old man now and I have to start taking care of my body and have to start thinking about it in a completely different way. But this is the case for all of us, whether we're young, whether we're old or middle-aged or whatever. We have to start thinking of what is the ultimate goal of life. Like there's an expression in English, I think it was Thomas Paine who coined it. He said there are the two most important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you understand why. And this is so true. If we don't understand why we were born, then it's actually asara. And the whole thing is useless, no matter how famous you might be. I've given this example before. When Prabhupada was in Paris, he said he went to Invalides. Those of you who've been to Paris, you know Invalides, the place where Napoleon Bonaparte is buried, and all the old soldiers. It used to be a hospital for the injured soldiers in the Bonaparte Wars. And then afterwards, Napoleon died, and he was brought back, and there's a big monument to Napoleon there, and the devotees brought Prabhupada there. Prabhupada was always quoting about Napoleon and Hitler and all these old conquerors and Alexander the Great and everywhere. And Prabhupada says, yes, Napoleon said, Napoleon is France, France is Napoleon. He said, so? He said, I'm here now in Paris. I can see France. Where is Napoleon? You know, so it's like this misidentification with the body is so deep. It's just so deep. And, we have to, it doesn't mean that the body isn't there. It doesn't mean that the senses are not there. It doesn't mean that we don't cultivate a relationship with all our friends and family. That's not the understanding. Is not to negate every single aspect of our lives, but to understand that all these relationships, no matter how wonderful they are, how beautiful they are between sons and fathers and daughters and mothers and husband and wife and everything like that, they're temporary. They're temporary. It's not the ultimate goal. It doesn't mean that we're callous or indifferent, or we don't engage in relationships, that we're completely indifferent to the suffering of other people. Not at all. But we understand what is the reason for people to be suffering. What is the reason for this cycle of birth and death, and how do we get out of it? Prabhupada goes on to say, because the aim is nothing but sense enjoyment during the daytime. We can particularly observe how the human being is engaged for nothing in the great cities and industrial towns. And we see this. Wow, some of the places you go to, some of the places I've been to in my life, and we can see also from history nowadays, at least it's a little bit cleaned up. But if we can imagine the conditions under which people lived under just 100 or 50 years ago in these huge towns and cities all around the world, we can see, the famous novels and books from Charles Dickens and how he's describing the Victorian era in London. And Oliver, what was his name? The Charles Dickens guy?
Oliver Twist.
Oliver Twist. You see the whole story of Oliver Twist. And if you recall, during that time, that was the Victorian era in which he wrote about. And if you recall, that was when Britain was in charge of the planet. The whole world was a British colony. The whole world, literally. I mean, if you just look at the map of Britain in those days, you say the sun never sets on the British Empire. So the wealth of the entire planet was flowing into London. From India, from Australia, from Canada, from Africa, from all the Far East and Singapore, and all those countries were all under the British yoke. And what was the condition of the people living in London at the time? Living in squalor, dying from TB, dying from cholera, living in squalor, in filthy conditions, working in mines, and working in for absolute nothing in the factories, children, 5, 6, 7 years old, working in the looms and the spinning mills and the cotton mills of Lancashire. I mean, and yet the wealth of the planet was flowing. So it didn't benefit the people. The people were not benefited. So because it was just this greed, and this greed, it is there, it's endemic. But there was absolutely nothing for the ordinary living entity. And all there was suffering and suffering and suffering and more suffering. I think the lifespan in those days was in the late 30s. The late 30s. That was the lifespan, the average lifespan. So Prabhupada is saying we can particularly observe how the human being is engaged for nothing in the great cities and industrial towns. There are so many things manufactured by human energy, but they are all meant for sense enjoyment, not for getting out of the material bondage. I mean, when we read, as I read the other day, the descriptions of Dwarka and the over 10,000 palaces that Krishna built, that he had Vishvakarma build on his behalf to house his queens, and the wealth and the opulence, fountains everywhere, pillars with rubies and gems and precious stones, and absolute everybody in complete and total ecstasy. These are millions and millions and millions of inhabitants living in these places. And we compare those descriptions, or the description of Ayodhya at the time of Lord Ram, compare those with the present day mega cities. So we have like the likes of London or whatever, New York. I mean, they're hell, total hell. But yet we think, oh yeah, let me engage in more sense gratification. And then we have a problem. So we create another problem to deal with the previous problem that we have, and that creates another problem. And then it goes on and on and on and on, and it just doesn't stop, because it doesn't stop. That's the problem. It does not stop. The cycle of birth and death, it doesn't stop, except if we take this human form of life and we use it for its ultimate purpose, is to realize I am suffering. I am suffering in this perpetual cycle of darkness and ignorance, and the only way out is to take to Krishna consciousness. So why are we hearing this? And we're devotees, because we need to be reminded, and every page of Prabhupada's books is reminding about this constantly. And after working hard during the daytime, a tired man either sleeps or engages in sex habits at night. That is the program of materialistic civilized life for the less intelligent. Therefore, they are designated herein as lazy, unfortunate, and short-lived. So this is lazy, unfortunate, and short-lived. Lazy human beings with a paltry intelligence and a short duration of life pass the night sleeping and the day performing activities that are for naught. And these are heavy verses. These are really, really, these strike home, and they particularly strike me because it's my life, and if I'm not careful, if we're all not careful, we'll end up losing sight of this, even whilst absorbed to a certain extent, whilst absorbed in thoughts and activities of Krishna. We have to be constantly vigilant, as Prabhupada says in the purport, strenuously and seriously engaged. As he said in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, which I always quote, as it struck me the first time I read it, one must scrutinizingly study these books, scrutinizingly, and not be deviated from the path. Where's that? Let me quote that verse, if you will forgive me for a second. In chapter 7, this divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. Namam duskritino mudha prabhajante naradama. Mayaya parita jnana asaram bhavam ashritaha. The next verse. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. This is heavy stuff. This is Bhagavad Gita. This is Krishna speaking. It's not like that the material nature is it's all nice and romantic and flowery, and we all yatama tatapat, and we all love each other and engage in big hugs and kisses, and it doesn't work like that. I mean, it may be presented like that in Bollywood or in Hollywood, that it's all dancing around a tree and waving cameras and everything like that. That's not the reality. That's in the movie house. It doesn't work like that. When you're out on the street, you're going to your factory every morning on a freezing cold bus in the middle of winter. That's the reality. You don't have enough money to pay the bills. You don't have this, you don't have that. You're worried about your kids growing up and whether this is going to work or that's going to work. Or you get some disease, and that's the reality. That is the reality. Forget about that romantic idea that they present in the movies. That doesn't work. Krishna's saying here, those miscreants who are grossly foolish, that's us. Remind ourselves, this is us, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. This is why we need this constant reminder. Prabhupada says in the purport, it is said in Bhagavad Gita that simply by surrendering oneself unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, one can surmount the stringent laws of material nature. And then Prabhupada goes on, this is a lovely point. And we get this all the time. Whenever we go out and try to preach, people, they hit us with this. And Prabhupada goes on to say, at this point, a question arises. See, there's always a question. There's nothing wrong with questions and answers and reciprocation and exchange. How is it that educated philosophers, scientists, businessmen, administrators, and all the leaders of ordinary men do not surrender to the lotus feet of Krishna? This is a good question. The all-powerful personality of Godhead. Mukti, or liberation from the laws of material nature, is sought by the leaders of mankind in different ways and with great plans and perseverance for a great many years and births. Everybody's looking for liberation. Liberation from what? Ultimately, liberation from suffering. Nobody wants to suffer. Suffering comes of its own accord. But so does enjoyment. They both come of their own accord. You don't have to go out to seek suffering. It just comes to you, whether you like it or not. We've all experienced that. That's suffering of the mind, suffering of the body, suffering from the devatas, whatever. The suffering comes in so many different ways and forms and attributes. But, Prabhupada says, if that liberation is possible by simply surrendering at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, why don't these intelligent, he's talking about intelligent here, intelligent, right? Why don't these intelligent and hard-working leaders adopt this simple method? I mean, it's a reasonable question. So why? Prabhupada gives the answer. The Gita answers this question very frankly. Those really learned leaders of society like Brahma, Shiva, Kapila, Kumaras, Manu, Vyas, Devala, Janaka, Prahlad, Bali, and later on Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Sri Chaitanya, and many others who are faithful philosophers, politicians, educators, scientists, etc., they surrender to the lotus feet of the Supreme Person, the all-powerful authority. Those who are not actually philosophers, scientists, educators, administrators, etc., but who pose themselves as such for the material gain, do not accept the plan or the path of the Supreme Lord. They have no idea of God. They simply manufacture their own worldly plans and consequently complicate the problems of material existence in their vain attempts to solve them. So you see, no matter what we do, no matter what we seem to have achieved in this modern materialistic society, which is so, I mean, let's face it, it's very, very, very advanced compared to 100 years ago. I mean, there's no comparison. It's like a different planet we're living on with all this AI technology that we're surrounded by, we're using right now. I mean, who could have thought that we'd be talking to somebody who's listening to us all over the world. Not only talking, we can see each other from all parts of the planet simultaneously. So I mean, this is subtle intelligence, and it's applied in the most dynamic way. But even all of this, and as amazing as it is, and it is amazing. I mean, the achievement, 500 people can sit in a plane and fly from one side of the planet to the other. Is this not a mystic city? This is a mystic city. You can go underneath the water, down hundreds of meters in a submarine. So this is like another mystic city, and this has been achieved in our lifetime, without even a second thought. People are flying into outer space, and so on and so forth. So these are amazing achievements. This is not to be sniffed at. But at the same time, if all of this is not bringing us to the point of understanding the goal of life and why we were born, it all comes to naught. And again, this doesn't mean that we negate it, we throw it away, we say, oh, it's all rubbish, it's all Maya, so on and so forth. No, we engage it in Krishna's service. We engage our mind, we engage our intelligence, we engage everything in Krishna's service. Just like, what was it? Swarup Damodar, Srila Prabhupada's science disciple. I think he had a doctorate in chemistry, I think it was. He was a Manipuri. I don't know if you're familiar with Swarup Damodar. I interviewed Swarup Damodar Maharaj for the Prabhupada Leela Amrita when I was in America. He was visiting at the time. And so he engaged in a debate. Where was it? In I think it's the University of California, UCLA, at the time when he was Prabhupada's disciple, and Prabhupada was staying in Los Angeles at the time. And there was one professor, and I think it was Swarup Damodar's professor, who he was a student at the time when he met Prabhupada. That's how he met Prabhupada in Los Angeles. And so his professor was lecturing on the theory that life began from a combination of chemicals. And he mentioned the chemicals. He was very astute in that regard. He could list all the chemicals from which he claimed life was beginning. But in that class was Swarup Damodar, and Prabhupada quotes this very often. And Prabhupada was very proud of this. So he challenged. He was only he met Prabhupada, I think, like 6 weeks before this challenge was thrown out. So he said to his professor, so if I give you all the chemicals, can you produce life? So it's like, I mean, it's a very simple question. And when you turn the tables on the materialist, even in the most insane situation, they don't know what to, just like Prabhupada answered those reporters in Hong Kong. So if I was sitting under a tree, how many of you would have come to see me? Not one. But immediately, with that simple remark, all their nonsense ideas are just thrown out the window for the stupidity and the foolishness that they are. And what did the professor answer? He said, from what I can recall, I cannot say. That was his answer. Swarup Damodar said, if I give you all the chemicals, remember, he's a student, so he's beholden to this professor to be able to pass his final exams. But he's challenging him. I mean, isn't that what universities are for? To challenge everything. And the answer was, oh, I cannot say. So Prabhupada says the answer is not very distinct. That is not a fact. If the scientist says that life comes from chemicals, where did the chemicals come from? And nobody asked that question. This Darwinian nonsense, that the whole world is absorbed in. Nobody answers that. This Big Bang. So you cannot get chemicals without being supplied by somebody else. So Prabhupada says we're presenting this idea. People are being misled. It is the great question at the present moment that the scientist says that matter comes from life, but from matter life begins, but we are challenging no. From life, matter comes, just the opposite. And imagine, we are dealing with challenging, not only challenging in that sense, but we're challenging the opposite idea, the opposite argument to which the whole world is enthralled. The whole world, all the big, huge establishment institutions on the planet are absorbed in this idea that life comes from matter. And we're trying to defeat them. I mean, we have a huge task. What institution, what university on the planet is presenting the other idea, our idea? Not one. You go to Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or Yale or whatever, and all these big establishments, institutions of learning, they're based on ignorance. They're ignoring the actual reality of life itself. But we've got Krishna's statement from Bhagavad Gita. Under my superintendence, Krishna is saying, Maya Jakshena Prakriti, in chapter 9, from what I can remember. I can't remember the whole verse. Under my superintendence, from the Vedic literature, it just confirms under my direction. Not a single blade of grass is moving without my sanction. This is the reality. But we have to be convinced of this. We have to understand this ourselves. We have to not only, go through the motions and the rituals of our morning program and our evening program and snicking our way through our japa mala every day. We have to actually really believe this and absorb ourselves in it and take it to heart and believe it and put it into practice. Not in a fanatical way. I mean, not just denying everything around us that exists. Oh, that's Maya, that's Maya. No, that's not our goal. We're not fanatics. We're not nutcases. We're not a cult. But we should absorb ourselves in the reality of what is there. A devotee, he may be seeing a palatial building. He sees Krishna. You may be seeing some opulence. You see Krishna everywhere you go. You go in nature, you see birds, you see the ocean, you see a beautiful mountain view. Everything you see reminds you of Krishna. This is Krishna's energy. This is Krishna's creation. Krishna has made this. Look at this beauty. See a beautiful woman, a beautiful man, a handsome man, a beautiful child. This is Krishna. And as long as it was reminding you of Krishna, then it doesn't matter what it is. Then you're engaged in Krishna consciousness. You're engaged in Krishna's service. Just constantly satatam, kirtayanto mam. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita, it may appear like, oh, this is like, this is for the beginners. Let me go to the 10th canto and let me be absorbed in. There is so much in Bhagavad Gita. Every single sloka, every single page, every single purport is loaded, absolutely loaded with energy, with vibrancy, with knowledge, every word. So we have to try to make sure that our ecstasy, our bhav, is not directed towards the material energy. And that can easily be the case. It's so easy it's so attractive. It's not that it's not attractive. Material energy is so attractive and it's so easy. It's there. And you just have to grab it and enjoy. But we are not the enjoyer. That's not our nature. So just like Mahaprabhu was thinking that Yugyayitam Namishena, you remember that verse that we sing every day, Chakshusha Pravachayatam, that one moment, the blinking of an eye, one moment is like 12 years or more. To be separated from Krishna, from thought of Krishna, from the vision of Krishna, it seems like 12. That's why the gopis were cursing Lord Brahma. Why did you make us in such a way that we have to blink when we're there standing in front of Krishna and we have to blink, we lose the vision of Krishna in that moment when we're blinking. And Mahaprabhu is saying that in the Shikshastakam, that is like appearing like 12 years or more. This should be our absorbance. And even if it's in separation, even if it's in this mood of vipralamba, that is what holds us together. That is the mood that we're after, the mood of Mahaprabhu. We're coming in the line of Mahaprabhu. That's our sentiment. Sentiment is different in the material point of view. There's not, but in our sentiment, it's completely, it's our saving grace. But in this day and age, and this, it's just a sad situation that all these wonderful institutions of learning. I've given lectures in Harvard, I've given lectures in Yale, I've spoken in Oxford. I mean, I've gone on programs with devotees more senior than me who have given absolutely brilliant talks, been so well received. But what did they achieve, these great institutions, over the last 200, 300, 400 years, whatever length of time they've been in existence? What is it? Cambridge, I think, is 1,000 years old. I mean, what's the point? So-called education, we remain fools and rascals. That's our education, because we do not know. There is no educational system describing Atma Tattvan. None. The human life is meant for understanding Atma Tattva. If it doesn't, if that's where we're going in the other direction, doesn't mean that we remain fools, we remain uneducated, and we don't know that, we don't go to school and learn one and one is two. That doesn't mean that we just reject education. That's not the point. But we have to understand, what is the goal of education? What is the goal of everything that we do, education or otherwise? What is the goal of marriage? What is the goal of brahmachari? What is the goal of sannyas? What is the goal of bringing children into the world? To ensure the responsibility that we have to ensure that they also get out of this cycle of birth and death. That's the goal. It's not that we reject. We're not Buddhists. We're not nirvishesha sunyavadi. We're not just rejecting everything. That's not our point. But engage it in the service of Krishna and not become absorbed by the incredible potency of the material energy. And it is potent. It is not something, Prabhupada says many times, my one concern is with my senior disciples, is they do not have enough fear of Maya. You have to have a fear of Maya. Maya is not a joke. It's not a joke. So we have to be constantly vigilant. There'll be so many obstacles in our way. But if we take shelter of Krishna, take shelter of the holy name, take shelter of Guru, take shelter of Srila Prabhupada, then it can be done. It can be done. But we really do have to be vigilant in our endeavor and not be complacent, be constantly endeavoring for perfection. It's guaranteed. It is guaranteed. Declare it boldly, O Arjun, my devotee never perishes. This is our objective. I think our time is up. Again, I went rambling on like the lunatic that I am, and in spite of the hay fever, I don't know how I didn't sneeze for the whole hour. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments? I'd be very grateful.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. And it shows that when you are absorbed in Krishna Katha, even hay fever goes away. So,
yes.
Thank you very much for this wonderful class. And we love it when you come directly to the point. And while reading this purport, I remembered Lavanga Prabhuji, who speaks, who always sings Jeev Jago. And
yes.
That was my first.
Isn't that a lovely song? That's a beautiful song. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. If devotees are thinking of various questions, I can probably ask a quick question.
Please.
So when the reporters asked Srila Prabhupada that, oh, you live in such an opulent place and car and everything, I was just thinking that Srila Prabhupada must be laughing inside, saying, you do not know what I have left to come
Yeah.
here. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, this is nothing what I have. I mean, this is
Yeah.
not opulent. You don't really know
Yeah.
what opulence is.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Exactly.
we do appreciate that he left a lot just to come here for us. Yeah.
And Prabhupada, when Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, of course, I remember the first time I went, first time I went to Vrindavan, I was shocked. I was a very young devotee. I think it was about a year in the movement or something. And I was like, wow, this place is like, wow, pigs everywhere. I saw one time was a mountain of pigs in the middle of the road, a mountain of them in the middle of the day. They were all asleep, a tail sticking out here, a head is sticking out there, a leg is sticking out there. It was literally a mountain of pigs. And I was like, ah, and the open sewers and the garbage and the litter. And I said, this is Vrindavan. Then I would go back to the Krishna book and I would read, oh yeah, the gopis, blah blah blah. And I was like completely bewildered. When we see Vrindavan, we see it with one eye. Prabhupada saw Vrindavan through the eyes of the gopis and through the eyes of Krishna, and we see it in a different way. But then, as time goes on, and we hear Krishna Katha, and we go on pilgrimage, and we go on parikram, and we hear the particularly from devotees like Dina Bandhu and other devotees that now take us around, and Ayendra, who's absorbed in the whole 24-hour kirtan. It's a completely different world, and it opens up and it gives us this vision that is like, wow. And like you said, when Prabhupada was questioned like that in Hong Kong, and compared to what he left, he saw this vision of Vrindavan through the eyes of Mahaprabhu and Lord Nityananda. Prabhupada is coming straight from the spiritual world, and he's going to this, so-called opulent hotel in Hong Kong. I mean, how does it compare with this? Just like I read the other day in the Krishna book about the opulence of Krishna's palaces when Sudama Brahman went to visit Krishna, and the way the palaces are described is like, wow, it's just absolutely stunning, stunning. And this is a reality. This is an absolute reality. So yes, we can't see anything with material vision. We have to see everything through the eyes of Shastra, through the eyes of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and then everything is revealed. Everything is revealed. That's a very nice point you made. The opulence of a so-called opulent hotel in Hong Kong compared to Vrindavan. Yeah, it's worlds apart. Literally, worlds apart.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for that explanation. Are there any other questions or comments? Prabhuji, you said that we want to be liberated, and all this time I've said, okay, we need moksha, we need liberated. But today is the first time it's sunk in me that liberation from suffering is what
Yes.
we are looking for.
Yes.
Because we do not want to suffer, and if suffering is taken away from us, then we've made it. But then are we, I want to ask you, is it not an escapist mentality that, okay, you're shifting your goalpost to, okay, I'm suffering, but this is nothing compared to, I'm trying to escape suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to say that I'm an escapist, without a doubt. I mean, why should I suffer anymore? It's not that the devotee in one sense, is interested in liberation or mukti. The mukti is not the idea. But by automatic, Prabhupada says, even a devotee can go to hell. It doesn't matter. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is praying, may I be born as a worm and stool in the home of a devotee. That's all. I'm a wicked materialist, no good qualities do I possess. It's Bhaktivinoda Thakur's celebration day on Sunday, I think. And Gadadhar Pandit also. And they're two amazing days to observe. But it's not the mukti that we're interested in. Yes, who wants to suffer? We don't want to suffer. But the gopis suffered intensely in separation from Krishna. That's where our suffering, that's where our real suffering really lies. Not the suffering of the mind, not the suffering of the body, not the suffering of this hankering for material enjoyment or lamentation because it's not there. That's not the kind of suffering we want to escape from. We want to escape the suffering of the separation from Krishna and thoughts and consciousness of Krishna. That's what we want. That's what real mukti is. Engagement in the service of Krishna, just like the gopis. That's the real deal. The suffering will go on. Prabhupada didn't suffer. Imagine when Prabhupada was preparing himself to go to America in the 50s, in the late 50s, shortly after he took sannyas, he was gored by a bull in Vrindavan, suffered immensely. He walked around the streets of Delhi selling for 2 pice, selling his Back to Godhead magazines in the noonday sun. And one day he fainted. One man had to come along and save him from the sun. He was trying to collect some pice, not even rupees, some paisa, just to get enough money so he could print the next issue of Back to Godhead. Was that not suffering? For Prabhupada, it wasn't suffering. It was a preparation for a lifetime of devotion to his spiritual master. Yes, he suffered. From a material point of view, we can say that was suffering. But from a spiritual point of view, it was ecstasy. I'm not in a position where I can see my life like that, where I can see my suffering as ecstasy. On the contrary, I complain all the time. Krishna, why did you do this? Why did you send me that problem? Why do I have this problem with my body? Blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on. But when we reach the stage where we're on an even keel, the mind is balanced, how does that come about? Again, not to just be sounding like a broken record, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam. That's it. That's our shelter. That's the Yoga Dharma. That's where we succeed, or that's where we fail. If we can't, for whatever reason, or won't, for whatever reason, take to that process, that's our loss. So now we have this chance. We can't let it go. Hold on to it for dear life. Thank you very much. That was wonderful thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roshi. Any other questions or comments? If there are no more questions or comments, can I request Prashanatma Prabhu, are you able to close this session? Hare Krishna. Okay, maybe Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hare Krishna. Danvatsana to the assembled devotees. Thank you, Vidhura Prabhu, for this wonderful enlightening session. It's always wonderful to hear you speak because the next day we always try to because your lectures resonate with what goes on in our daily life. So we try to observe and see what we learned yesterday in the Bhagavan Bhattan class. So thank you so much, Prabhu, for giving your valuable time to this class. Thank you for the assembled devotees also for coming together for this Sangha. So thank you for your appreciation. I'd request all the devotees, please let's unmute and encourage Vidhura Prabhuji as well as glorifying by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra once.
Hare
Please,
Krishna,
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Hare
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 Rama,
Rama, Hare
Rama
Rama,
Rama,
Rama
Hare
Rama,
Hare.
Hare Hare.
Panchakalpatrishta,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna,
Hari Hari Bol.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
jai.
Thank you very
Jai
much.
Shri Prabhu ki
Jai.
Hari Bol.
jai.
Thank
Hare
you.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody. Good night. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.